He woke up next to the chief's giant daughter. At dawn, 321 warriors waited for the wedding. Dalton Pierce opened his eyes to find himself in a wooden dwelling he didn't recognize. Lying next to a woman whose presence filled the entire space, Kimimela, the chief's daughter. She was still asleep, her breathing steady, her frame taking up most of the bedding they somehow shared. Outside, he heard it. Voices, hundreds of them. The rhythmic sound of feet shifting in dirt. The low murmur of an enormous crowd that had gathered before the sun fully rose. His heart hammered against his ribs as fragmented memories from the night before tried to piece themselves together. He'd helped her carry supplies, heavy crates she'd been struggling with near the trading post. She'd thanked him, offered him food, invited him to rest. That was it. Nothing more. So why was he here? And why did it sound like half the territory was standing outside? Kimimela's eyes opened. She didn't look surprised to find him there. That should have been his first warning. She sat up slowly, and Dalton was reminded again of her size. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, with shoulders broader than most men he'd traded with. Her presence wasn't just physical. It was the way she held herself, like she'd never questioned her right to take up space. She glanced at him, then toward the door. No panic, no confusion, just calm acceptance. That's when the fear really set in. "You need to get dressed," she said. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. Dressed for what? Dalton pushed himself up, his mind racing. What's happening out there? She reached for a leather vest draped over a wooden chair. The ceremony. What ceremony? Kimimela paused, turning to face him fully. For the first time, something flickered across her expression. Not quite amusement, not quite pity. "You slept under my roof. Unmarried. The entire community knows by now." Dalton's stomach dropped. "I don't understand. You accepted my hospitality. You stayed the night. In our tradition, that's a declaration. A declaration of what? Intent to marry." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his boot catching on the edge of a woven blanket. "That's not what I meant. I didn't know. I just needed a place to sleep. Intention doesn't matter. Action does." She fastened the vest, then moved toward a small table where elaborate jewelry waited. Turquoise, beadwork, the kind of adornments worn for important occasions. My father counted them this morning. 321 warriors. Every man of fighting age in our community. They're all here to witness. Witness what? She picked up a necklace, holding it up to catch the early light filtering through gaps in the wooden walls. "Our marriage, or your refusal." She let that hang in the air for a moment, then added almost casually, "Refusal would be seen as an insult. To me, to my father, to everyone waiting outside." Dalton's throat went dry. "What happens if I insult them?" Kimimela met his eyes. Her expression was unreadable. "You're a smart man, Dalton. You can figure that out." Outside, the murmuring grew louder. Someone called out in a language Dalton didn't understand. Another voice answered, then another. The sound built like a wave approaching shore. Kimimela walked to the door, her hand resting on the wooden frame. She didn't open it yet, just stood there, her back to him, waiting. The silence between them stretched impossibly long. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Almost too quiet. "They'll want an answer soon. My father isn't known for his patience." Dalton stared at her broad shoulders, at the way morning light caught the beadwork on her dress, at the door she hadn't opened. Beyond that door, 321 warriors waited. 321 men who expected him to marry a woman he barely knew, or face consequences he couldn't even begin to imagine. And somehow, standing in that small dwelling with dawn breaking outside, Dalton realized something that made his blood run cold. Kimimela hadn't looked surprised when she woke up. She hadn't asked questions, hadn't demanded explanations. She'd known exactly what would happen, which meant only one thing. This wasn't an accident. Dalton's voice came out harder than he intended. "You knew this would happen." Kimimela's hand remained on the doorframe. She didn't turn around. "Yes, you knew that if I stayed here they'd expect us to marry." "Yes." The simplicity of her answers made it worse somehow. No guilt, no apology, just confirmation. Dalton felt heat rising in his chest. Not just fear anymore. Anger. "So you trapped me. You invited me in. Made it seem like simple hospitality, knowing full well what it meant to your people." Now she turned. Her dark eyes met his without flinching. "I didn't trap you. I gave you an opportunity. An opportunity? His laugh came out bitter. To marry a stranger or die? That's your idea of opportunity? To be chosen? She took a step closer. Even in the confined space, she moved with deliberate control. Do you know how many men have asked to marry me? 63. Every single one of them looked at me like I was a prize to be won, or a burden to be managed. None of them saw me. They saw the chief's daughter. They saw status, power, land. And I'm different? Dalton shot back. You don't even know me. I know enough. She moved past him, reaching for a leather pouch on the table. I watched you yesterday at the trading post, before I asked for your help. You were negotiating with old man Pearson. He tried to cheat you. Told you those pelts were wolf when they were clearly dog. You could have called him out, shamed him in front of everyone. Instead, you just smiled and offered half the price. Gave him a way to save face. Dalton remembered that interaction. It had seemed insignificant at the time. So you showed respect where you didn't have to. You understood that his dignity mattered more than being right. She opened the pouch, pulling out a small object wrapped in cloth. Later, when those boys were harassing the water carrier, you stepped between them. You didn't fight, didn't threaten, just stood there until they backed down, because you knew they wanted an excuse to escalate. You didn't give it to them. You were watching me all day. I was looking for someone. She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a carved wooden figure, a bird in flight. My mother made this before she died. She told me that I should choose a man the way she chose my father, not by how loud he talks or how strong he appears, but by watching how he treats people who can't benefit him. Dalton stared at the carving. Outside, someone shouted something. The crowd responded. The sound rolled through the morning air like thunder. Time was running out. That still doesn't give you the right to decide for me. You're right, it doesn't. Kimimela set the carving down carefully. But neither does it give you the right to judge customs you don't understand. In your world, a man asks and a woman accepts or refuses. In mine, a woman invites and a man chooses to enter or walk away. You chose to enter. You chose to stay. Those were your decisions. I didn't know what they meant. Ignorance isn't innocence. Dalton, you're a traitor. You cross territories. Deal with different people. You should have asked about our customs before accepting anything. Her voice softened slightly. But you didn't, because you assumed hospitality works the same everywhere. That assumption brought you here. The door rattled. Someone was testing it from outside. Kimimela's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to Dalton. My father will come in soon. When he does, he'll ask you directly, in front of his warriors, in front of the entire community. She picked up the carved bird again, running her thumb along its wing. You can say no. You can walk out that door and refuse the marriage. No one will stop you from leaving. Relief flooded through him. But you should know something first. She looked at him again, and this time there was something raw in her expression. Something that looked almost like vulnerability. Every man who asked to marry me was afraid of my size, my strength, the fact that I could probably beat most of them in a fight. They wanted the chief's daughter. They didn't want me. She paused. You're afraid too. I can see it, but not of me. You're afraid of the situation, of being trapped. That's different. The door swung open before Dalton could respond. Chayton stood in the entrance, his frame filling the doorway. Behind him, morning sunlight illuminated hundreds of silhouettes. Warriors, every single one watching. The chief's eyes moved from his daughter to Dalton. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. It's time to give your answer, merchant. And that's when Dalton saw it. Kimimela's hand was shaking, just slightly, just enough to make the carved bird tremble in her palm. Chayton's presence changed the air in the room. He wasn't just tall, he was commanding in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. The chief stepped inside, and suddenly the dwelling felt smaller, more suffocating. His eyes settled on Dalton with the kind of focus that made it impossible to look away. Step outside. Both of you. Kimimela moved first, slipping past her father without a word. Dalton had no choice but to follow. The moment he crossed the threshold, the full reality of his situation became undeniable. 321 warriors. Chayton hadn't been exaggerating. They formed a massive semicircle around the dwelling. Some on horseback, most on foot, all of them watching. The morning sun cast long shadows across their faces. Not one of them looked away. Not one of them spoke. The silence was more intimidating than any threat could have been. Dalton's legs felt weak. He'd seen crowds before, trading posts during harvest season, gatherings at river crossings, but nothing like this. This was organized, deliberate, every man positioned with purpose. This was ceremony, or execution. He wasn't sure which. Chayton walked past him, moving to stand in the center of the semicircle. When he raised his hand, the entire assembly seemed to lean forward as one. This man accepted my daughter's invitation. He stayed beneath her roof. By our laws, he has declared his intent to join our family. The chief's voice carried across the gathering without effort. Does any warrior here dispute this? Silence. Does any man present have reason to object? More silence. Chayton turned to face Dalton directly. Do you understand what you've done? Dalton's mouth was dry. He forced himself to speak. I didn't know about your customs. I meant no disrespect. Intention is irrelevant. You acted. Actions have consequences. The chief's expression remained neutral. Unreadable. My daughter chose to extend her invitation to you specifically. She has refused 63 marriage proposals, turned away warriors who offered horses, land, alliances, yet she opens her home to a traveling merchant. Do you know why? She told me I showed respect. That's part of it. Chayton glanced at Kimimela, who stood several feet away, her posture rigid. My daughter is not like other women. She was born during the hardest winter our people remember. Her mother barely survived the birth. When Kimimela came into this world, the medicine woman said she would be like the mountain itself, strong, unyielding, towering above others. He paused. She grew faster than the other children. By the time she had seen 12 winters, she could outrun most of the boys. By 15, she could outlift the young warriors. By 20, men began to fear her. Dalton watched Kimimela as her father spoke. She didn't move, didn't react, just stared straight ahead like she'd heard this story too many times before. Chayton continued. Fear turns to resentment. Resentment turns to cruelty. The same boys who once played with her as children began spreading stories, saying she was cursed, that any man who married her would be diminished, that she would dominate him, make him weak. The chief's voice hardened. 63 proposals. Every single one from men who saw her as something to conquer, to prove themselves against. Not one of them wanted a partner. They wanted a trophy. So she chose me because I don't want to conquer her? She chose you because you didn't see her at all. Chayton stepped closer. You saw someone struggling with heavy crates. You offered help without hesitation. Didn't comment on her size. Didn't make it about her being a woman. You just helped. That's why she invited you. Because for once, someone treated her like a person instead of a problem to solve. Dalton looked at Kimimela again. She was still staring straight ahead, but her jaw was tight, tense, like she was bracing for something. I didn't mean to give her false hope. Hope is never false. Only expectations can be false. Chayton's expression shifted slightly. Not quite sympathy, but something close to understanding. You can refuse. Walk away. No one here will harm you. I give you my word. But understand what that refusal means. My daughter took a great risk inviting you. She exposed herself to judgment, to mockery. If you walk away now, you confirm what every warrior here already whispers, that she is too much, that no man can stand beside her as an equal. The weight of those words settled over Dalton like a physical burden. This wasn't just about customs or traditions. It was about Kimimela's entire future, her place in the community, her worth as a person. And somehow, without meaning to, he'd become central to that story. One of the warriors shifted. The movement drew Dalton's attention. The man was younger, maybe 25, with scars across his chest. He was smiling, not friendly, predatory, like he was waiting for Dalton to refuse, waiting to watch Kimimela's humiliation, waiting to be proven right about her. Dalton turned back to Chayton. If I agree to this marriage, what happens? We hold the ceremony immediately. You become part of our community, part of our family. You would be expected to live here, learn our ways, contribute to our survival. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. But you would also receive our protection, our loyalty, our respect. These things are not given lightly. And if I refuse, you leave. Now, today. And my daughter learns once again that she is too different to be loved. Chayton's voice dropped lower. That is your choice, merchant. Your honor. Or her heart. Which matters more to you? Dalton felt hundreds of eyes on him, felt the weight of judgment from warriors who'd already decided what kind of man he was, felt Kimimela's silence like a knife pressed against his ribs, but most of all, he felt something else. Something he hadn't expected. Anger. Not at Kimimela, not at the situation, at every single man who'd looked at this woman and seen something to fear instead of someone to know. I need to speak with her. Alone. Chayton studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. You have until the sun clears those trees. Then I need your answer. He turned and walked back toward the gathered warriors, leaving Dalton standing in the center of the semicircle. Kimimela finally looked at him, and in her eyes Dalton saw something that made his chest tighten. Not hope, not even expectation, just exhaustion, like she'd already accepted his refusal before he could speak it. Dalton walked toward Kimimela slowly. The warriors watched every step. He could feel their judgment like heat from a fire. When he reached her, he kept his voice low. Can we talk somewhere without an audience? She glanced at her father. Chayton gave a slight nod. Kimimela turned and walked toward the edge of the dwelling, where a small grove of trees offered minimal privacy. Dalton followed. They stopped just beyond earshot of the nearest warriors, though dozens of eyes still tracked their movements. The moment they were alone, Kimimela spoke first. You don't have to explain. I understand. Do you? Dalton crossed his arms. Because I'm not sure I understand any of this. You manipulated me, used your customs as a trap, put me in an impossible situation. Yes, that single word again. No defense, no excuses. It should have made him angrier. Instead, it just made him tired. Why me, Kimimela? Really, not the story about watching me be respectful. The real reason. She looked away, toward the horizon where the sun was climbing steadily. Because you were leaving. What? I asked the trading post manager. You were scheduled to move on tomorrow, head south toward the mining territories. You weren't staying, weren't putting down roots, weren't trying to build connections here. She finally met his eyes. That made you safe. Safe from what? From wanting something from me. Every man who proposed wanted access to my father, wanted influence, wanted to use our marriage as leverage for trade agreements or territorial disputes. They had plans, ambitions. You had none of that. You were just passing through. A stranger who would be gone in a day. Her voice softened. I thought maybe someone who wasn't invested in our community politics might see me differently. Might not care about all the stories and reputation. Dalton studied her face. The hard lines around her mouth. The way she held her shoulders like armor. So you took a chance. Invited me in. Hoped I'd be different. I took a risk. Yes. She turned fully toward him now. And I was right, wasn't I? You don't see me the way they do. You're not afraid of me. You're angry, frustrated, trapped, but not afraid. She paused. That's more than 63 other men could manage. I'm angry because you took my choice away. Did I? Kimimela tilted her head. You could have refused the invitation. Could have asked questions before accepting. Could have left during the night if you were uncomfortable. You had choices. You just didn't know the consequences of those choices. That's different from having no choice at all. Dalton wanted to argue. Wanted to maintain his righteous anger, but she wasn't entirely wrong. He had made assumptions, had accepted hospitality without understanding what it meant in her world. You still should have told me. If I'd told you, would you have stayed? No. Exactly. She crossed her own arms now, mirroring his defensive posture. You would have walked away, thanked me politely, moved on, and I would have had one more story about a man who couldn't handle me. At least this way you had to confront it. Had to stand here and decide what kind of man you want to be. That's not fair. Neither is being rejected 63 times for being too tall, too strong, too much. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Do you know what it's like to watch men shrink away from you? To see fear in their eyes when you walk into a room? To hear them whisper that you're unnatural? She took a breath. I'm 28 years old. In my community, most women are married with children by 20. I've spent 8 years watching everyone around me find partners while I stand alone. Because I was born different. Dalton felt something shift in his chest. Not pity. Something closer to recognition. I was married once, 7 years ago. Her name was Catherine. She was small, delicate. Everyone said we were perfect together. She died in childbirth. The baby, too. He hadn't meant to share that. The words just came out. Everyone told me I'd find someone else. That I'd move on. Build a new family. But I couldn't. Every woman I met, I just saw Catherine. Saw what I lost. So I started traveling. Became a merchant. Convinced myself I was better off alone. Kimimela's expression softened. I'm sorry. I'm telling you this because I understand what it's like to feel like you're too much of something. In my case, too broken, too damaged, too stuck in the past. He uncrossed his arms. But that doesn't mean I'm ready for this. For you. For any of it. I know. She looked down at her hands. That's why I'm giving you permission to leave. Right now. Tell my father no. Walk away. I'll handle the consequences. What consequences? The mockery. The shame. The confirmation that I'm unmarriageable. She shrugged like it didn't matter, but her voice betrayed her. I've survived worse. Dalton opened his mouth to respond, but a voice interrupted from behind them. The chief is getting impatient. It was the young warrior with the scars, the one who'd been smiling earlier. He stood at the edge of the trees, his expression smug. Or maybe the merchant needs more time to decide if he's man enough for Kimimela. Kimimela's entire body tensed. Dakota, this isn't your concern. Everything involving the chief's family is my concern. Dakota stepped closer. He was tall, muscular, with the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged. Especially when an outsider disrespects our traditions, makes a mockery of our customs by hesitating. He has every right to consider his choice, Kimimela said. Does he? Dakota's eyes flicked to Dalton. I proposed to you 3 times. Each time you refused immediately. Didn't even consider it. But this merchant gets a private conversation? Special treatment? What makes him so different? The jealousy in his voice was obvious. This wasn't about tradition or customs. This was personal. Dalton felt a cold certainty settle over him. Dakota had been one of the 63, and he'd never gotten over the rejection. You want to know what makes him different? Kimimela's voice turned sharp. He didn't propose. Didn't offer horses or land or promises. Didn't treat me like a transaction. That's the difference. Dakota's smile turned cruel. So he trapped you without even trying. Must be embarrassing. The great Kimimela, reduced to tricking strangers into marriage because no warrior will have her. Kimimela moved forward before Dalton could react. She closed the distance between herself and Dakota in 2 strides. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. Walk away. Now. But Dakota didn't move. Instead, he looked past her to Dalton. If you refuse her, I'll make sure everyone knows it was because you found her repulsive. Too masculine. Too abnormal. I'll make her a story that gets told around every fire for the next 10 years. And that's when Dalton understood. This wasn't just about Kimimela's dignity. This was about power. About control. About men like Dakota who couldn't handle rejection and needed to punish women who dared to say no. Dalton stepped forward, positioning himself between Kimimela and Dakota. You finished? Dakota's smile widened. The merchant has a backbone after all. I'm not interested in your games. Dalton kept his voice level. But I am interested in why you care so much about what I decide. If Kimimela rejected you, that's between you and her. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. Dakota's hand moved to the knife at his belt. Not threatening, just resting there. A reminder. I'm one of the chief's most trusted warriors. I protect this community. That includes protecting it from outsiders who think they can walk in and take what they want without understanding what it means. I didn't take anything. You took her invitation, her hospitality, her reputation. Dakota's voice rose slightly, loud enough that nearby warriors could hear. And now you stand here, debating whether she's worth your commitment, like you have any right to judge her, like you're somehow better than the warriors who've proven themselves in battle, who've bled for this community, who actually belong here. Several warriors had moved closer now, not surrounding them exactly, just watching, listening, waiting to see what would happen. Dalton recognized the tactic. Dakota was building an audience, making this public. If Dalton backed down now, he'd look weak. If he escalated, he'd look like an aggressor. It was a trap disguised as a confrontation. Kimimela's hand touched Dalton's arm. Don't. He wants you to react. Wants an excuse to challenge you formally. Challenge me to what? Combat. Single combat. First blood. It's within his rights as a warrior who objected to the marriage. She kept her voice low. If he draws blood from you in front of witnesses, it voids the engagement. Proves you're not strong enough to stand beside me. Dakota heard her explanation. His smile became triumphant. She knows the law. So let me make this simple, merchant. Refuse the marriage and walk away with your dignity intact. Or accept it and face me. Prove you're worthy. Prove you can protect the chief's daughter the way a real warrior would. He drew his knife slowly. What will it be? Dalton stared at the blade. It wasn't large. Maybe 6 inches. Sharp enough to be deadly, but designed for precise work. Hunting, skinning. The kind of weapon a man carried for practical purposes. Dakota held it loosely, confidently, the way someone holds a tool they've used 1,000 times. Dalton had never been in a knife fight. He'd thrown a few punches in his trading days, wrestled drunk men out of saloons. But actual combat, against someone trained, he'd lose. Badly. This is insane. This is tradition. Chayton's voice cut through the tension. The chief walked toward them, his expression unreadable. Dakota invokes his right as an objecting warrior. The law is clear. If you accept my daughter's invitation, you must prove yourself capable of standing beside her. First blood, no fatal strikes, witnessed by the council. He looked at Dalton directly. Do you accept these terms? Dalton's mind raced. If he refused, he looked like a coward. If he accepted, he'd probably get cut to pieces. Either way, Dakota won. Either way, Kimimela lost. There has to be another way. There isn't. Chayton's tone was firm. The law exists to protect our women, to ensure they're not taken by men who cannot defend them, cannot provide for them, cannot stand as equals. He paused. If you truly care about my daughter, you'll prove it. If you don't, you'll walk away. Those are the only options. Kimimela pulled on Dalton's arm, turning him to face her. Her eyes were urgent. Just leave. Please, this isn't worth bleeding over. Dakota is one of our best fighters. He's been training since childhood. You're a merchant. There's no shame in admitting that. There's shame in running. Dalton looked past her at Dakota, who was practically glowing with anticipation, especially when someone's trying to humiliate you just to salvage their own ego. Then let me fight him. Kimimela's voice dropped. Let me face him instead. Chayton shook his head. You know that's not permitted. A woman cannot fight a challenge meant for her intended. It would void the engagement immediately. So I'm supposed to just stand here and watch him get hurt. You're supposed to trust that if he's meant to be with you, he'll find a way. The chief's eyes softened slightly when he looked at his daughter. And if he's not, then it's better to discover that now. Kimimela's jaw tightened. She looked at Dalton with something between desperation and resignation, like she'd already seen the outcome and didn't want to witness it again. Dalton took a breath. His hands were shaking. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't a warrior. He was a merchant who'd accidentally walked into something far bigger than himself. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to walk away, to apologize, to leave this community and never look back. But then he thought about Dakota's threat, about spreading stories, about making Kimimela a joke, about punishing her for daring to choose differently, and something in him hardened. I accept the challenge. Dakota's grin was predatory. Finally, the merchant grows a spine. But I have one condition. Dalton turned to Chayton. If I draw first blood, Dakota has to accept the marriage, publicly. No more challenges, no more interference, no more stories. He acknowledges that Kimimela has chosen and respects that choice. The crowd murmured. That wasn't standard. Chayton considered it for a long moment. That's acceptable. If you win, Dakota accepts the marriage and withdraws all objections. If he wins, the engagement is void, and you leave immediately. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. Does anyone dispute these terms? Silence. Then prepare yourselves. The challenge begins when the sun reaches its peak. Chayton gestured to 2 warriors who stepped forward to serve as witnesses. May the outcome honor both fighters. Dakota twirled his knife once, showing off. This will be over quickly, merchant. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. Dalton didn't respond. He was too busy trying to figure out how a man who'd never fought with a blade was supposed to beat someone who clearly had, and wondering if accepting this challenge was the bravest thing he'd ever done, or the stupidest. The sun climbed higher. Dalton had maybe 30 minutes before the challenge began. 30 minutes to figure out how to survive a knife fight against a trained warrior. Kimimela led him away from the crowd, back toward the dwelling. Her movements were stiff, controlled, like she was holding something back. When they were alone again, she turned on him. That was stupid. Probably. Dakota has been fighting since he was old enough to hold a blade. He's fast, precise, ruthless. She paced in a tight circle. You're going to get hurt. Badly. Maybe. Dalton watched her pace. But if I walked away, he'd make you a story. A joke. Something cruel that follows you for years. I couldn't let that happen. She stopped moving. Why do you care? You don't even know me. I know enough. He echoed her words from earlier. I know what it's like to be reduced to something you're not. To have people decide who you are before you get a chance to show them. He paused. And I know what it looks like when someone's been hurt too many times. You have that look, Kimimela. Like you're always bracing for the next rejection. The next cruelty. I recognize it because I wore it for years after Catherine died. Her eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. You're still going to lose. Then I'll lose standing up. He tried to smile, but it felt weak. Do you have any advice? Anything that might help me last more than 30 seconds? Kimimela studied him for a long moment. Then she moved to the table and picked up a small knife. Not a fighting blade. A utility knife used for cutting leather. Show me how you'd hold this. Dalton took it, gripping it the way he'd seen other men hold knives. Blade pointing forward, thumb along the spine. Kimimela immediately adjusted his grip. Wrong. Dakota will expect that stance. He'll disarm you in the first exchange. She repositioned his hand, turning the blade inward. Hold it like this, reversed. It limits your reach but protects your wrist. Makes it harder for him to knock it away. How do you know this? Because I had to learn. My father insisted. Said that being a woman didn't excuse me from knowing how to defend myself. She stepped back. Dakota fights aggressively. He'll come at you hard right away, trying to end it quickly. Make you look weak in front of everyone. Don't let him control the pace. Don't react to his movements. Make him react to yours. I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do. You're a merchant. You negotiate. You read people. You understand leverage. She circled him slowly. Fighting isn't that different. It's about finding what your opponent wants and using it against them. Dakota wants to humiliate you, to prove he's superior. So give him what he thinks he wants. Appear weak, hesitant. Let him overcommit. Dalton felt something click in his mind. Bait him. Exactly. He's arrogant. He'll assume you're an easy target. Use that assumption. But when you see an opening, don't hesitate. One clean strike. First blood. That's all you need. She touched his arm, her hand warm against his skin. And Dalton, aim for somewhere that bleeds easily but isn't fatal. The forearm, the shoulder, somewhere visible. He nodded, trying to absorb everything. His heart was hammering. His palms were sweating. He'd never been this afraid before. Not when bandits had surrounded his wagon. Not when he'd crossed flooded rivers. Not even when Catherine had started bleeding and he knew the midwife couldn't stop it. This was different. This was choosing to walk into danger. Choosing to fight a battle he couldn't win. Kimimela? Yes? If I lose, don't let Dakota's words define you. Don't let him take anything else from you. He met her eyes. You're not too much. You're not unnatural. You're just someone who deserves better than what you've been given. She didn't respond, just stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. Then she leaned forward and kissed his cheek. Quick, gentle. Try not to die, merchant. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with a borrowed knife and a strategy that probably wouldn't work. The sun continued its climb. Warriors began gathering in a larger circle, creating a natural arena. Dalton could see Dakota on the opposite side, stretching, loosening his shoulders. The man looked relaxed, confident, like this was just another training exercise. Chayton stood at the center of the circle, waiting. When the sun reached its peak, he raised both hands. The crowd fell silent instantly. The challenge will now begin. First blood determines the victor. No fatal strikes, no interference from witnesses. His eyes found Dalton. Step forward. Dalton's legs felt wooden as he walked into the circle. Every eye tracked his movement. 321 warriors watching, judging, waiting to see him fail. Dakota entered from the opposite side, twirling his knife casually, showing off for the crowd. When they stood 10 feet apart, Chayton spoke again. Do both fighters understand the terms? I do, Dakota said. Dalton's voice came out rougher than intended. I do. Then when I step back, you may begin. Chayton looked at each of them in turn. Fight with honor. He stepped backward, clearing the space between them. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Dakota's smile turned vicious. Last chance to run, merchant. Dalton shifted his grip on the knife, holding it the way Kimimela had shown him. Reversed. Defensive. I'm not running. Then let's see what you're made of. Dakota lunged forward, closing the distance in 2 explosive steps. His blade came up fast, aimed at Dalton's exposed shoulder. The fight had begun. Dalton barely dodged the first strike. Dakota's blade passed so close he felt the air move against his skin. He stumbled backward, arms flailing for balance. Not fake. Genuine panic. The crowd murmured. Dakota's smile widened. He'd seen weakness. Exactly what he wanted. Pathetic. This is the man Kimimela chose? He advanced again, his movements controlled. Predatory. Maybe I should just end this quickly. Save everyone the embarrassment of watching you fumble. Dalton kept backing up, his knife held awkwardly. Let him think you're helpless. Let him get overconfident. Dakota feinted left, then struck right. Dalton twisted away, but not fast enough. The blade caught his shirt, tearing fabric but missing skin. Close. Too close. You're just delaying the inevitable, Dakota said. He was playing to the audience now. Voice raised. Look at him. He can barely hold his weapon. This is who wants to join our family? This is who thinks he's worthy of the chief's daughter. More murmuring from the warriors. Dalton could feel their judgment. Could sense them agreeing with Dakota. He's right. You're outmatched. You're going to lose. But then he caught sight of Kimimela at the edge of the circle. Her face was tight with worry, but her eyes met his. And in that moment, he remembered something. She hadn't just taught him how to hold a knife. She'd told him how Dakota thought. Aggressive, impatient, someone who needed to dominate, someone who couldn't stand being made to look foolish. Dalton stopped backing up, stood his ground, let his shoulders relax slightly. You talk a lot for someone who hasn't drawn blood yet. Dakota's expression darkened. What did you say? I said you talk a lot. Dalton shifted his stance, no longer looking quite as helpless. Big words, big threats. But we've been fighting for 2 minutes and you haven't touched me once. Well, except for my shirt. Does fabric count as first blood? Because if it does, you should probably check with the chief. The crowd reacted. A few quiet laughs. Not many, but enough. Enough to scratch at Dakota's pride. His jaw clenched. You think you're clever? I think you're showing off instead of finishing this. Which makes me wonder if maybe you're not as good as everyone says. Maybe you're worried that if this takes too long, people will start asking questions. Dalton kept his voice casual, conversational, like why a trained warrior needs more than a minute to beat a merchant. Dakota's grip on his knife tightened. The relaxed confidence from earlier was gone. Now there was anger. Dalton could see it in his eyes, in the way his muscles tensed. Good. Angry fighters make mistakes. I'm going to enjoy this, Dakota growled. He charged, not the controlled advance from before. This was pure aggression, all power, no strategy. Exactly what Dalton had been waiting for. At the last second, Dalton dropped to one knee. Dakota's blade passed over his head, the momentum carrying the warrior forward. Dalton rose as Dakota stumbled past. And in that moment of imbalance, he struck. Not a wild slash. One precise movement. The reversed grip Kimimela had taught him. His blade caught Dakota's forearm just below the elbow. A clean cut. Not deep, but enough. Blood welled immediately. Bright red against brown skin. Visible to everyone watching. The crowd went silent. Dakota froze, staring at his arm in disbelief. Chayton stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He examined Dakota's wound, then looked at the witnessing warriors. They nodded confirmation. The chief raised his voice. First blood has been drawn. The merchant is victorious. The words seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Dakota turned to face Dalton, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. For a moment, Dalton thought the man might attack again anyway, might ignore the rules entirely. But then Chayton placed a hand on Dakota's shoulder. It's done, warrior. Honor the outcome. Dakota jerked away from the chief's touch. He looked at Dalton with pure hatred. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Chayton's voice carried absolute authority. You invoked the challenge. You accepted the terms. You lost. Now you will honor your word. Acknowledge the marriage. Withdraw your objections. Publicly. Dakota's hand trembled. The knife fell from his grip, landing in the dirt. I acknowledge the marriage. The words came out forced, bitter. I withdraw my objections. And, Chayton prompted, And I respect Kimimela's choice. Each word seemed to physically hurt him. She has chosen. I accept this. Chaitan nodded once, then turned to address the gathered warriors. The challenge is complete. The objection is resolved. Let no one question this union. He looked at Dalton. You have proven yourself capable, proven yourself worthy. Tonight we hold the ceremony. The crowd began to disperse, warriors talking among themselves. Their tones had changed. Where there had been skepticism before, now there was something closer to respect, or at least acceptance. Dalton stood in the center of the circle, his hand still gripping the knife, his heart still pounding. He'd won, somehow, against impossible odds. He'd actually won. Kimimela appeared beside him. She didn't say anything, just took the knife from his hand gently, their fingers brushing. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, or might have been relief, or might have been something else entirely. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. I learned from watching you. He managed a shaky smile. You said to make him overcommit. I just talked until he did. Talking. That's your weapon. She almost laughed. Almost. A merchant who wins fights with words. It's what I know. Dalton looked at her fully now. This woman who had manipulated him into this situation, who had gambled everything on a stranger, who stood taller than him and probably could have beaten Dakota herself if tradition allowed it. I guess we're really doing this then. Getting married. You can still refuse. You won the challenge. Satisfied the terms. No one would blame you for walking away now. Would you blame me? She considered the question seriously. No. You've already given me more than I had any right to ask for. You stood up for me when you didn't have to. Fought for me when you didn't know how. That's more than 63 other men ever did. Dalton realized he was still standing in the middle of the circle. Warriors were watching, waiting to see what he'd do next. This was the moment. The real choice. Not the one forced on him by circumstance or custom, but the one he made freely. He looked at Kimimela and saw past the intimidating height, past the reputation, past everything that had made other men afraid. He saw someone who'd been alone for too long. Someone who'd taken a desperate chance on a stranger because she'd run out of options. Someone who deserved to be chosen. Actually chosen, not trapped or forced or obligated. What time is the ceremony? He asked. Kimimela's breath caught. Sunset. Then I guess we both have some preparing to do. Sunset arrived faster than Dalton expected. He stood at the edge of the ceremonial space, watching as the community transformed an ordinary clearing into something else. Women laid woven blankets in a circle. Men built a fire at the center, feeding it carefully until flames reached toward the darkening sky. Children scattered flower petals along a pathway. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight. Kimimela appeared from one of the dwellings, and Dalton forgot how to breathe. She wore ceremonial dress. Elaborate beadwork covered the bodice, turquoise and red patterns that caught the firelight. Her hair hung loose down her back, adorned with feathers and carved bone. She was stunning. Not despite her height or her strength, but because of them. She moved toward him with that same controlled grace, and when she reached his side, she looked nervous. Actually nervous. You're still here. Where else would I be? Running for the hills seemed like a reasonable option. She tried to smile, but it wavered. This is your last chance, Dalton. Once we stand before my father and the witnesses, there's no going back. This becomes real, permanent. It's already real. He reached for her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm evening. I'm not going anywhere. Chaitan stepped into the center of the circle, his presence commanding immediate silence. We gather to witness the joining of two lives, the union of Kimimela, daughter of this tribe, and Dalton Pierce, who has proven his worth through courage and honor. His voice carried across the assembly. Step forward. Dalton and Kimimela walked to the center together. All 321 warriors were there. Every single one, just like the title had promised. Watching, bearing witness. But the energy was different now. Not hostile, not skeptical. Something closer to acceptance. Chaitan continued the ceremony, speaking in two languages so Dalton could understand. Words about partnership, about strength found in unity, about choosing to stand beside someone not out of obligation, but out of respect. When it came time for them to speak, Kimimela went first. I chose you because you didn't see me as something to fix or fear or conquer. You saw me as a person. That's all I ever wanted. Her voice was steady, but her hand tightened around his. I don't know if I tricked you, or if fate brought you here. Maybe both. But I'm grateful you stayed. Dalton turned to face her fully. I spent 7 years convinced I was too broken to love anyone again. Too damaged to build something new. You didn't let me hide behind that excuse. You challenged me. Forced me to choose who I wanted to be instead of who I thought I had to be. He paused. I'm choosing you. Not because 300 warriors are watching. Not because tradition demands it. But because when I look at you, I see someone worth choosing. Every day, for as long as you'll have me. Something shifted in Kimimela's expression. The guardedness she'd worn like armor finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't bother hiding them. Chayton placed his hands on both their shoulders. Then by the laws of our people and the witness of this community, I declare you joined. Your lives are now one path. Your struggles are shared. Your victories belong to both. He stepped back. Seal your union. Kimimela leaned down slightly. Dalton rose up to meet her. Their kiss was gentle, tentative, the first honest moment between two people who'd started this journey through manipulation and desperation, but found something real anyway. The crowd erupted, not polite applause. Actual celebration. Warriors shouting approval. Women calling out blessings. Even some of the men who'd looked skeptical earlier were smiling. Dakota was gone. He'd left immediately after the challenge, unable to watch. But everyone else was there, accepting this, accepting them. When they pulled apart, Kimimela was smiling, genuinely smiling. Not the careful expression she'd worn before, something unguarded and radiant. So, husband, what now? Now we figure it out. Together. Dalton looked around at the celebrating crowd, at the community he'd accidentally joined, at the woman who'd gambled everything on a stranger. I have to admit, this isn't how I expected my week to go. You woke up next to the chief's daughter. 321 warriors waited for a wedding, and somehow, you survived it all. She laughed. The sound light and genuine. I'd say you're adapting well. I had good motivation. He squeezed her hand. Though next time you want to trap someone into marriage, maybe lead with the whole truth. Next time? She raised an eyebrow. Planning to marry someone else already? Just you, for the rest of my life, which based on today's events might be longer than I expected. They stood together in the firelight, surrounded by celebration. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way possible, not through fate or destiny or anything mystical, just through choice. The choice to see past fear, past reputation, past everything that made this impossible. And somehow, impossibly, they'd made it work. The night stretched ahead of them, the first night of a life neither had planned, but both had chosen. And for the first time in longer than Dalton could remember, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to build. If you loved this unexpected Western tale of cultural collision and unlikely romance, click the video on your screen right now to discover another story from the untamed frontier, where nothing is quite what it seems. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these compelling Western narratives that explore honor, courage, and the unexpected paths life takes us down. That video is waiting for you right now.